Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Still got the helmet on. So we know that the Mandalorian is going to be spending the second season looking for Baby Yoda's own kind. You know, those sorcerers with the laser swords. But since during this period of time the Jedi Order is more or less still defunct and slowly rebuilding, it's going to be a lot harder than one would think. The way Din Djarin talks about the Jedi, you'd think that they were some kind of mystical race that hovers between fiction and reality. So, without any clues or ideas where the Jedi might be hiding, what is the Mandalorian's next step? Well, it's to seek out other Mando kin. Now, we've talked a lot about Mandalorian history and the devastation these people brought onto themselves, but we've never actually looked at which members of the Mandalorian creed are still alive and functioning in the galaxy by the time of the show. So, that's what we'll be trying to do today. So let's start out with a more obvious character that has been confirmed for Season 2, and that's Bo-Katan Kryze. She'll be played by Battlestar Galactica actress Katie Sackhoff, who actually voices Bo-Katan in the Clone Wars and Rebels series. Bo-Katan Kryze is a pretty interesting character who starts off as a lieutenant in the Death Watch movement during the Clone Wars era. At the time, the Death Watch was basically operating in secret because they had lost the civil war against the pacifist New Mandalorians. Pre Vizsla, also governor of Concordia, is secretly the head of Death Watch, and he's trying to organize a takeover of the government, first by using terrorism, and then by collaborating with various criminal organizations to create a false flag attack that will destabilize the existing pacifist government, creating opportunity and room for Death Watch's more military-first ideology to come in and take over. Unfortunately, Pre Vizsla doesn't partner with just any criminal. He partners with former Sith Lord and assassin Maul, who ultimately kills Pre Vizsla in trial by combat and claims leadership of the Mandalorians. Now, Bo-Katan actually belongs to a subgroup within the Death Watch known as the Night Owls. They were an elite all-female unit led by her. Bo-Katan comes from Clan Kryze, and her sister actually was the ruling monarch Duchess Satine Kryze. And so Bo-Katan's attack on the New Mandalorians is actually also an attack on her own sister. Bo-Katan is clearly more traditionalist than Satine and also seems to have very few objections to Pre Vizsla's actions, even after he teams up with some very unsavory characters. It's only after Maul kills Pre Vizsla and takes the crown that she objects. Bo-Katan believes that Mandalore cannot be ruled by an outsider like Maul, and from that point on she begins leading her own resistance against her former allies in the Death Watch. Shortly after the Maul takeover, the former Sith Lord executes Bo-Katan's sister, creating even more tension between the two groups. Bo-Katan's Night Owls are a small faction, but they ultimately join up with the Clone Army and besiege Mandalore in the last months of the Clone War. They end up defeating Maul's faction. Now, Bo-Katan was named Regent of Mandalore, but shortly after, the Empire takes over the Republic, and all of a sudden, she's without a job again. Bo-Katan and many Mandalorians would resist against the Empire, but collaborated families like Clan Saxon would betray them and take over leadership of the planet as a puppet for the Empire. Bo-Katan would become a rebel queen in exile, and we basically wouldn't hear from her for a little bit. As the rebellion grew bigger in size, other families like Clan Run would also rise up against the Empire. Bo-Katan Kryze, along with Sabine Run, would launch more aggressive offensives against Imperial outposts on the planet, and they would even regain the Darksaber, the official symbol of leadership for the Mandalorians. Unfortunately, after they get the Darksaber, something really terrible happens known as the Great Purge. We don't really know details yet, but there was a Night of 1,000 Tears, so it was pretty bad. We're not sure what happened to Bo-Katan, but at one point, Moff Gideon, a former ISB officer, retook possession of the Darksaber. Judging by how run down the tribe looks, I'm gonna assume that Mandalore was devastated by the conflict. Anyway, Bo-Katan would be a pretty good place to start if you're looking for a Jedi. She, after all, worked with plenty of Jedi, and she had respect for many of them, like Obi-Wan Kenobi, Kanan Jarrus, Ezra Bridger, and Ahsoka Tano. The real question for Din Djarin is, where is Bo-Katan Kryze, and is she being held in like an Imperial Supermax prison? I'm sure Moff Gideon probably knows, and Bo-Katan would like her sword of leadership back from him. Now, the next Mandalorian we're going to be talking about is Sabine Run. As far as Mandalorians go, she's pretty unique. You can probably tell from her custom-painted armor. She had a claim to the Mandalorian throne, but ultimately gave it up to Bo-Katan in order to pursue other ventures. As a youth, she was a pretty talented individual and joined the Imperial Academy, where she actually constructed a very dangerous weapon that targeted Beskar metal. Most Mandalorians wore Beskar armor if they could afford it, so this was a huge problem for Sabine and seen as a massive betrayal against her people. Sabine would ultimately run away from the Empire and join up with the rebel group known as Phoenix Cell. She would be pretty active with the rebels in the Lothal sector and contributed to many early rebel successes in the area. During the liberation of Lothal, the Jedi named Ezra Bridger pulled off a crazy whale-related stunt that dragged Grand Admiral Thrawn's Star Destroyer into the unknown region with him on it. We know that Sabine Run and Ahsoka Tano will go on a journey to try and find him. We also now know that Ahsoka Tano will most likely be in the second season of The Mandalorian. Rosario Dawson has already been spotted on some merch from Hasbro, and you know Star Wars, if it's on the merch, it's probably official. So if we see Ahsoka Tano, there's a good chance we would also see Sabine Run. Especially if you take a look at all the graffiti on the Mandalorian Season 2 posters. Sabine loved tagging up stuff with rebel propaganda. There are also a lot of people who believe that Ahsoka Tano will be the one training Baby Yoda, so let's see what happens. Next up we have Boba Fett, son of the famous Mandalorian mercenary Jango Fett. Or is Jango Fett the father of the famous Mandalorian bounty hunter Boba Fett? I guess it kind of depends on which Star Wars movies you saw first. But rest assured, Boba Fett was legendary in his own rights and had a pretty illustrious career as a bounty hunter. Before he was even a full-grown adult, he had taken down an entire Venator-class Star Destroyer by himself and captured Mace Windu and Obi-Wan Kenobi, two very formidable Jedi, all by himself. But then came that fateful day on Tatooine when his jetpack was punctured by a blind Corellian and the deadly Boba Fett was sent headfirst into a Sarlacc pit. Now, there have been a lot of debates on what happened to Boba Fett that day. There have even been short stories that cover kind of the aftermath of the situation and what happens to Jabba's palace and so on. It's even said that George Lucas wanted to film a scene where Boba Fett later climbs out of the Sarlacc, but ultimately decided against it. This means that at least in George Lucas's personal canon, Boba Fett is still alive. We also have heard rumors that Temuera Morrison has updated his CV to include the Mandalorian TV show. Temuera Morrison's face has probably been used on more Star Wars characters than any other actor alive, and his return to the franchise means he'll be either playing Boba Fett or maybe some old clone trooper or commando, cross my fingers, who survived all of the chaos. Now, from a more practical standpoint, if you are Disney and you're creating the Mandalorian TV show, leaving out Boba Fett is kind of a stupid thing to do. He's like one of the most popular characters in the entire franchise. I don't know why, but he is. Now, when the new Mandalorians adopted this more pacifist form of governance, the one thing that they kept from the old days was the Mandalorian Protectors. This ancient faction of elite warriors served the Mandalorian throne and protected the ruler and people from outside threats. These protectors were drawn from all of the Mandalorian clans and made up of the best fighters and pilots. But they were actually a pretty small group, more like a royal bodyguard size rather than an entire army. So when the Empire came and took over the planet of Mandalore, the Mandalorian Protectors had to run off to the moon of Concord Dawn. From there, the Mandalorian Protectors would watch incoming hyperspace lanes for any trouble coming into the system. After it was found out that the Protectors were allowing rebels to fly through the area, Gar Saxon of the Mandalorian Collaborator government destroyed the garrison on the moon, killing almost all of the remaining Protectors, except for their leader, Fen Rao. Fen Rao would eventually join up with the rebellion and help Sabine Run and Bo-Katan Kryze retake Mandalore from the Imperials. He would also kind of serve as a mentor for Sabine Run, kind of like that knight who follows around Daenerys in Game of Thrones. I mean, he didn't want the power or the throne for himself. He basically wanted to stay a protector. It's possible that Fen Rao would eventually start recruiting again and try to rebuild his Mandalorian Protector faction. It's kind of sad how far the Mandalorians have fallen. In the Old Republic era, the Mandalorians were a massive faction and they were quite influential about what happens in the galaxy, and now they're basically just, small nomadic tribes wandering around. I hope to see more of them. I hope to see that more of Mandalorian society has survived. I also kind of am curious about what the Great Purge is. I want to see more details about that and what exactly is left of the Mandalorian people. Well, guys, let me know in the comment section down below what you're excited about for this new second season of The Mandalorian. And as usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.